Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Quality, the podcast. My name is Hamish Alangaratne, and since 2023, I've been interviewing some of the most talented and well-respected quality leaders in the pharma and biotech industry to learn how they got to where they are now. This season is all about our guests and their journeys. Why they got into science, how they got into quality, their biggest challenges and greatest learns, and the highs and lows along the way. Every week, I'll be bringing you a new guest with the purpose of inspiring the next generation of quality leaders. Welcome to Season 2. I hope you enjoy the show. Welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Quality, the podcast. Today I'm joined by Andrea Karpinecz, Vice President of Quality Control at Iovance Biotherapeutics. Andrea spent over 16 years in cell therapy, starting her career in QC and leading QC teams through 2 commercially approved cell therapies at Biotech, and more recently joining Iovance to support their PLI process for Amtagvi, which is the first FDA-approved TIL therapy for advanced melanoma. We talk about Andrea's journey through QC into leadership, and in particular how to scale QC teams for commercial success, the leadership mindset required for leading in cell therapy, her advice for QC professionals that want to build a leadership career, and the biggest lessons she's learned from bringing therapies to market. If you're a quality leader and specifically leading QC in a cell therapy organization, you do not want to miss this episode. Let's get into it. Hi, Andrea. Welcome to Let's Talk Quality.
Thanks, Hamish. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you on. We've been speaking about this actually for a while, and I've had a lot of your previous colleagues on the podcast, Jake Dries, Irving. So your background has come from a sort of a group of people who I know well, and you've gone through a great journey with a lot of these guys. So I'm excited to have you on the show, and I guess unpack like your journey to where you are now. I've given you a bit of an introduction, but if you could give everyone a very high level overview of who you are and what your current role is, and then we'll go back from there.
Sure. Sounds great. So hello, everyone. I'm Andrea Karpinecz. I'm the Vice President of Quality Control at Iovance Biotherapeutics. I've been in cell therapy for the last 16 years. I actually started on placental-derived adherent stem cells, and then I moved into the CAR-T space where I ran the analytical team for 2 CAR-T therapies and then ended up running the overall QC department for our 2 commercially approved CAR-T therapies. Now I'm at Iovance working on the world's first commercially approved TIL, which is really exciting. So I'm very excited to be here to speak with you. And I do need to share that any opinion that I express is my own and not that of Iovance or previous employers.
Absolutely. Thanks for that. Really exciting journey you've been on and time that you're on at Iovance at the moment. So let's take it back then. When did you and how did you originally get into science?
Sure. So I had always found genetics fascinating. I thought it was interesting how different traits got passed down through different family members. And I always wanted to help people and work with people. I had done a lot of babysitting when I was younger. I had been a camp counselor for many years, and I thought I was going to end up being a teacher. And one day when I was in high school, my mother shared an article with me on genetic counseling. And I read it and I found that it was so interesting to me because it had the science piece, specifically the genetics I was interested in, and then the counseling, which was the helping people piece. And I thought that that was a really great opportunity to combine my 2 passions. So I looked into it and I kind of built my pathway of how I would get to that genetic counseling point. And that's really what put me ultimately on the pathway to go to college and to study biotechnology, which ended up putting me in industry. Had a few turns, a few maybe U-turns, some roadblocks on my journey, but that's ultimately how I ended up in science.
So from a young age, then you kind of knew that your path was going to go down the science route, or you were interested in that from a young age through, I guess, the want to helping people. So when did your first role in science come about?
Yeah, so I ended up finishing my undergrad. And like I said, I was planning to go into genetic counseling, which required a master's degree. And again, I had a little bit of a roadblock. It didn't work out for me. I was waitlisted at the programs. And here I was, 21 years old, fresh out of college, didn't have a job, didn't have my independence. I was still living with my parents. And I had to reevaluate what I wanted to do with my life and where I wanted to go. And I had to really sit and think, do I want to spend another year or two in college and going to school that costs a lot of money to end up in something that, has been this idea to me. I didn't know much about genetic counseling other than what I read. I didn't have much experience. So I had to evaluate, was that what I wanted to do? Or do I need to maybe start making money and figure out what I was interested in and gain my independence? Because I knew at that time, as is today, many companies offer tuition reimbursement. So I decided that I was going to get a job, go into industry, and start figuring out what I liked and what I was passionate about in industry, what worked out for me. So I applied to different jobs, and I ended up in my first role right out of college, which was testing Centrum at what was then Wyeth. And so spoiler alert, that was not for me, right? I was in a chemistry lab. It was not my cup of tea. I was more into the bio and, the genetic side of things. And I was in QC, and it was my first role in QC. I didn't understand right first time. I didn't get why deviations were such a problem. I had no idea what a change control was. And I remember doing this job for about a year and a half and, thinking, I don't know if this is for me. And so my husband and I were with friends of ours, and I was talking to one of them, and I was expressing these concerns, right? It's like, I got this job because that's where I thought I needed to start going, and I just don't know if it's for me. And she was actually working for Celgene Cellular Therapeutics at the time, and she said, well, are you interested in cell therapy? And of course, my ears perked up. That was kind of aligned with some of my passions. And we talked about it. And I was very fortunate. I applied to the job. I got in the QC department. And at the time, the QC department was so small, there were 4 of us, Hamish. There were 4 people in the entire QC department, 2 of whom were leaders, right? We had a director, a manager, and then 2 team members. And I was one of the 2. And it just worked out for me because I was in this really small group, and I had that great leadership from my leader at the time, who I ended up working for 9 years. And he taught me about quality. He taught me the importance of right first time. He gave me that room to grow and explore and have all those opportunities. So that's how I ended up in cell therapy. That's how I ended up in QC. And quite frankly, I've been in it ever since and never left.
Amazing. So that was Celgene, and what year was that when you started?
2009.
2009, right? Okay, fine. So, and what did you know about cell therapy at the time when you initially were told there's this opportunity in cell therapy?
Yeah, I didn't know anything about it, to be honest. Yeah. It was not on my radar. I'd never heard of the company. It was completely new to me. And as soon as I started hearing about it, it just made so much sense. Yeah.
I mean, it's funny thinking 2009. What's that? 16 years ago now. It's so much has happened in those years in the cell therapy and gene therapy space. But so then, how did your career kind of evolve? Then you started in QC, obviously, and you're still in QC. So what if you take us back to that 2009 period over the next few years? How did you evolve into a leadership position?
Yeah. So. For me, again, I've been in the cell therapy space for 16 years. I joke I was in it before it was cool. And I was at the bench. I was learning all the different pieces. I actually started in environmental monitoring. So I know what it's like to gown up and be in a clean room for hours on end with very slow, deliberate movements.
Yeah.
So, I was able to learn all the aspects of QC. And I went from micro to analytical. I did raw materials. And as I continued to grow in my experience and stay with the company, new opportunities came up. And I remember one year we were reviewing the corporate goals, and there was a line on there about a virally transduced T cell product. And I was like, tell me more about that. And that was actually bringing in the first CAR-T product into Celgene. So I asked to be on that product, and I was one of the first or the only 5 people that tech transferred it in, which was a really exciting experience. And I worked on the CAR-T. I learned all the different aspects of it, and that gave me a really strong foundation and technical background to then grow and evolve into a leadership position. And so, opportunities arose. Just my natural willingness to look to find solutions, to get around roadblocks, and to support team members. I always fought for people that, went above and beyond, if they, had contributions, I wanted to make sure that they were recognized. And, that was some feedback that my leaders gave me. They said, you always acknowledged people that did the work, and that, along with your willingness to solve these problems, that's why we felt that, leadership was the next transition for you.
And did you know much about leadership? Like, was that just naturally something that you did? You try to help people, trying to give people the right recognition. And did you always want to go down that leadership route, or did that just those natural traits kind of come to fruition, and they were it was really evident that you had the ability to build teams?
Yeah. So when I look back at my life, not just my career, I remember being told that I was naturally a leader. It was just some of these traits that I had. I remember being in sports and my coaches saying that I was a natural leader, and team members looked to me, and I thought it was very strange because I didn't understand why. I didn't understand what I was doing because I wasn't doing anything specific in my mind. It was just the way I operated. Yeah. But apparently it was something that just came to me naturally. People, I was just there to help people. I was there to achieve end goals, and that was a great combination. So really, it was fortunate. It was a natural thing for me, but I didn't know anything about leadership, and I had a lot of work to do. It was not like I fell into it and I was a perfect leader, by no means whatsoever. I had to spend a lot of time working to understand how to motivate the people, how to work with the people. I had the right foundation, like I said, and it was just something that kind of naturally worked with how I like to operate. But I had to go read a bunch of books. I had to have a lot of coaching and mentoring, and I worked really hard at it, right? It was something that I was driven to be successful in, and I wanted to help the people, and I wanted to be successful for myself. So I took the time, and I was able to get myself to a good spot where, I'm still always growing and learning, right? We all are. We all make mistakes. We're all always learning, but, I'm really happy, and I really enjoy building strong teams.
Do you know why that is? Like, why do you think that you had that innate sort of want and desire to help or give people recognition and develop people? Is there anything that you can trace back to like your childhood and your early days that you think kind of spurred those characteristics on?
Yeah, probably for me, I have a huge thing about fairness, right? I only have one sibling, but for me, it was always important that everything was fair, and I wanted other people to be fair. If I saw something that wasn't fair, I would speak up. My sister and I, we were proponents for everyone. Like, we would go out and we would stand up for people, and we would say, no, that person's not being treated right, or that person's not being treated fairly. So it was just natural for us. I don't know where it came from. It's just the way we kind of looked at things. I always wanted to be treated fairly. And so if I saw something that didn't seem right to me, I would speak up.
What so taking us back to then the early days of sort of, I guess 2015, 16, when the CAR-T space was evolving. What was that like? What was it like being in the kind of early days of something that you probably maybe didn't realize the extent of the impact that the work that you were doing at the time was going to have on the world? What take us back to those days?
Yeah, it was intense, right? It was a once in a lifetime experience. I don't think I could replicate it today. I don't think those opportunities exist today. Like I said, we were a very small company. People had the opportunity to work in a lot of different areas and get a lot of experience that maybe isn't that prevalent today. So for me, it was a great experience. Like I said, I was able to help bring the product into the company. I was able to learn all the different facets of QC, participate in all those different pieces. And I also learned a lot about the manufacturing process, which I wouldn't necessarily have had if it were a different company or a different setup. And, like I was saying earlier, I actually did end up going back to school and pursuing a higher degree. And I was able to do that through Celgene actually while we were working on the CAR-T product. And my master's program was actually working with our process development group and doing experiments and setting up, studies on CAR-T cells. So I had that other hands-on experience outside of the QC. I had more development, some manufacturing type pieces. So I got that whole, well-rounded view and picture to be able to do that. And, like I said, it was very intense, but it was a fantastic experience. I wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't have that. And it's something that I remember people telling me when they started working for us that they would say they've learned more in 1 year in cell therapy than they had in all the previous years in their last company. So there's just so much growth and so much opportunity that it's really an incredible experience. And, trying to get things, hit the deadlines, hit the timelines, get your approvals, get your product out the door is an amazing, chance to know that you have that opportunity to save other people and help improve their lives.
So your role at the time, what were you, like an associate director of QC or progressing up to director level?
So back in like 2015, 2016, probably more in probably around senior manager. I don't remember all the
something
time.
Like middle management sort of, but on your path to sort of hiring. So was it all systems go? You were hiring people, you were building your team, you were growing, you were kind of learning on the job, everything very fast paced, very, evolving quite quickly. Like, did you have an end goal in mind at that point? Like, was your path really clear that you wanted to stick with QC? You loved that part of the role. And did you see the path ahead? Did you want to become a vice president of QC one day? What did your future career look like at that point?
Yeah. So I always joke that my end goal is to be CEO, because why not, right? Why limit yourself? Shoot for the moon. If you don't make it, you'll fall among the stars. Overall, I'm very driven to move up and improve, and I've been very open to different opportunities. So I did always have an idea of where I wanted to go, right? If we're talking about career development and planning and pathways, I would have an idea. I'd have a template of what is my next position, where am I interested in going, and I would keep my eyes and ears open for different opportunities and projects that would help fill some gaps in my experience to help get me there. But I think for me, and what I like to coach and guide my team members on, is the key thing about career development is to be flexible. You need to have a plan, but you also need to be open and flexible. And I kind of think of it more as following a GPS, right? So you have an endpoint, you input this endpoint in your GPS, your destination, or in your career development path, the role that you're trying to get to. And sometimes you make mistakes, right? Sometimes you either miss your exit or you make a wrong turn. Whether you're following your GPS or in your career development plan, you make a mistake, something happens, something changes, or something's outside of your control, right? Like there's traffic up ahead, or there's flooding, or a really bad accident. And when those situations happen, you have to be flexible in life. And if you liken it back to the GPS, what does your GPS do? Your GPS reroutes you, right? They look for alternate routes. They look for different ways to get you where you're going. And ultimately, you end up at the same destination, but you have this different route that you take where, again, if you're following your GPS, maybe you found a great new restaurant that you're going to try that you would have never seen before, or you had this other great view of the countryside, and you had this great opportunity that if you stayed on a really strict path, you wouldn't have been able to see. And similarly in your career, as long as you're open to these, these reroutes, these little detours, you can come up with these great experience that if you weren't open to it, it wouldn't have happened and you wouldn't be where you are today. So for me, my reroute was getting into CAR-T. And if I didn't take that reroute, if I didn't ask about that, if I didn't want to get involved in that project, I wouldn't be where I am today. So for me, I have a plan, I have a template, but I'm always open to new ideas, and I'm always asking questions and on the lookout for new opportunities. And I encourage everyone else to do the same.
Nice. So you became director, I think, in about 2019 at Celgene Stroke BMS. Was that around the sort of the time? And then that was a pretty a lot going on. You had Beckham Brianzi, the commercialization process in, I think, 2020, maybe 2021. So if you can take, I guess, For a director of a QC organization going through a cell therapy commercialization, what lessons in that lead up to that commercialization from a leadership perspective, from a technical perspective, and then there are probably so many lessons, but if you had to, I guess, highlight some of the top 2 or 3 that you think had the biggest impact on you at the time, take us back to that point in time and what that was all like and what you learned throughout that process.
Sure. So anytime you're going commercial, no matter what product you're working on, you have to have the right processes in place. That's a given. So, things like having your validated methods, your OS processes, your MRB, raw materials, so on and so forth. And you really want to have these in place and established before you go into your launch so that you're not building the plane as you're flying it, some may say. So that's step 1, have your processes in place. But when you think about cell therapy specifically, your patient populations can be very different between your clinical trials and your commercial product. The product is the cells, right? And my cells are going to be different from your cells that are going to be different from everybody else's cells. So when you focus on cell therapy, you always have to be vigilant, right? You have to keep your eyes on the data. You have to raise any flags. Even if you're not sure, it's better to ask. Ask questions when things look different. That to me was one of my biggest lessons learned. It's not a standard antibody where every batch is the same, or vitamins where there's no possible difference unless, there's a major issue in the manufacturing process. Every person, every lot is different, and you have to be vigilant and you have to keep your eyes open. And then when you think about from a product perspective and commercialization and trying to treat more patients, you have to have that long-term strategic plan on how you're going to get there. It's one thing to be able to get commercial approval and manufacture, a small number of patients a month. But because every patient is their own lot, right? We can't scale up. We can't go into these big, large batches where, you can make campaigns of large amounts of product, put it in the freezer, and then just give it to everyone. No, every patient has to come in. They have to go through the process. So having that plan from, a capacity perspective and a demand perspective, do you have enough space for your manufacturing? Do you have enough space for your QC testing? Document storage, product storage, right? You have in CAR-T, things are in freezers, liquid nitrogen. Do you have enough of that, or do you have offsite storage? Do you have seats for your people? How are you going to grow? How are you going to be able to support your demand? How are you going to do things faster, better, leaner, more compliantly, and making sure that you have that infrastructure to do so? So, everyone's focused on the BLA and the commercial launch a lot of times, but we need to make sure that you have that next step in how you're going to supply your patients and make sure that you can help as many people as possible.
There's a lot in there, and I suppose going back to your kind of your theory around rerouting your career, and you obviously went into CAR-T. That was your reroute that accelerated your career development pathway. You learned a ton of things. So then you've talked about a lot of the technical stuff there. Like, how about the leadership and the people involved? Because, in that process and that timeline, you're probably having a lot of setbacks, a lot of 2 steps forward, or 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and that sort of thing. How did you manage your mindset? How did you manage your people? How did all of that leadership career evolve over those few years?
Yeah, so mindset is huge. And I think it's a really important thing to be aware of. It's a very stressful environment. People are in this really fast-paced, high-stress environment. Lives are on the line, right? I've been in situations where if we didn't get the product out the door fast enough, the patient, didn't make it. And so, me personally, I happen to be pretty resilient. It's, again, just one of the ways I'm wired, which is really helpful. And, that's probably why I've been able to survive in cell therapy for 16 years, because it's just, I kind of thrive under the pressure and I'm able to manage it. But I've also had to incorporate a lot of learnings for myself from my leadership practices and my readings. For mindset, I'm pretty good at staying calm in situations. I had to do a lot of work to get there. It wasn't my original way of responding and reacting, and that was probably my biggest leadership learning. But being able to stay calm, think logically, and go through the process has really helped me, not only in my career and my leadership, but also in my personal life. I'm able to just, people can come up and tell me really, really bad news or really difficult situations. And I'll just, okay, let's talk through this. Let's figure out how we're going to do it. So that's helped me a lot, that I've become naturally more easygoing and calm, and things kind of roll off of me. But, I'm still human, and I do get stressed out, and there are different situations that will trigger me and get me there. So if I feel myself going there, or if I'm there, I have my own personal techniques. For me, it's changing my scenery, right? I'll get up, I'll go take a walk. I do a lot of audiobooks. I'll pop an audiobook in on my AirPod. I'll walk around, I'll change scenery, I'll get fresh air, and I'll just reset my mind and just, change the way I'm looking at things, distract myself, and just kind of walk away for a minute, take a breath, take a minute for myself, and leave everything behind and go, reset. And I think it's really important, especially in today's environment, because, stress and burnout is so prevalent, especially in cell therapy being so fast paced. And, you have to remember what the airlines say. Put your own oxygen mask on first before you try to help others. So when you feel yourself getting there, don't keep pushing through it. Stop, take a minute, put your oxygen mask on first, get yourself in a good state of mind, make sure you're good to go. Because if you're not in a good spot, you can't help others.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah. I think mindset is such an underappreciated sort of trait that is so important in any aspect of life, in your job, but particularly the job that you are doing. It's in that space. It's intense. It's high pressure. It's lives are at stake every day. How did you was that something that you learnt? How did that your ability to calm yourself down, for example, or your ability to stay calm or take yourself away from a stressful environment, listen to an audiobook, whatever it may be, was that something that you kind of learned over time? Did you have mentors that sort of supported you or taught you, certain tactics? How did that come around?
Yeah, so that was something I actually had to really consciously work on. It was not natural to me. So one of the techniques that I found that I thought would work, and it ended up working and was really helpful, was the fake it till you make it concept. So I would basically consciously choose to not react when people would come and tell me difficult situations or share bad news, right? Because I was the leader. They had to come tell me. And, people were probably laughing at me because I was sitting there physically holding myself back, don't react.
Sitting on your hands.
Basically I was like, and it was just so awkward probably. And they're like, what is wrong with her? And I'm like, I'm trying not to react. And so it was a lot of effort, right? I'm a naturally dynamic, passionate person, and to not have a reaction was the complete opposite way of how I'm wired. So I had to work really, really hard on that and make that conscious effort. But as the practice says, I faked it until I made it. Yeah. And it just became my natural way of being, to the point where people will compliment me on how calm I am. And I was like, oh, it took a lot of work to get there. And they'd be like, really? And I was like, yeah, you didn't know me 10 years ago. It was very different.
I think if you're passionate about something and you're driven and you want everyone to succeed and you want your people to do around, you wear your heart on your sleeve, and it's very easy to let your emotions show. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, because I was the same when I was a sort of earlier in my career, leadership career, and you do have to learn just to take a step back and just calm down and control your emotions before sort of offering advice or whatever. But I always think it's better to be that way of the line, rather than it's easier to calm yourself down rather than to kind of just I guess get yourself more pumped up, if that makes sense. So it's almost a good a good trait to have, because it shows that you're passionate and you care, and then you can kind of fine tune your calming yourself down, your emotions over time.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, I think everybody has that experience to some level, right? You're never going to make everybody happy, and everybody has a different personality. And sometimes, no matter how hard you work or how good you are, sometimes personalities just don't mesh. Yeah. And, so there were situations where, I had to make sure that I was leading the team appropriately, keeping them motivated, making sure that I wasn't doing anything that would make them say, hey, I don't want to be on this team anymore. So yeah, I've definitely had that. I think at some point every leader has. Yeah. And, it is important to understand how to keep the team motivated, right? And how to work with them and have the right responses and everything. But again, like I said, you're never going to make everyone happy. And there's always going to be someone at some point that is just like, this is not for me. You're not the right leader for me. And that's okay. And I think it's also a learning experience to get to that point, to understand that, I'm not going to be the right person for everyone, and to not take that personally. So understanding that maybe we're not the best fit. Oh, okay, that's fine. How can I help you? What do you need? Where do you want to go? If you don't want to stay on my team, where do you want to go and how can I help you? And I'm a huge proponent of keeping talent within the company. And if somebody's talent and we want to retain them and they don't feel that being on my team or being in my group is the right place for them, I'm going to really go out of my way and try and see how I can help them and how I can get them where they want to be within the company so we keep that talent.
Yeah, you've obviously learned and worked with some great people over the years. I touched on it earlier that I've done interviewed both Jake Treese and Irving, who you obviously know well. Like, what was it like? I guess working with those guys and having and Nolan as well, like having a great team around you, and then getting over the finish line with the two approvals.
Yeah, so I will always say that Irving was probably one of my best leaders. He really set me up for success. Like I said, I had a great leader when I first started. He was what I needed at the time. And then Irving kind of challenged me to grow and really get into that leadership mindset, not just doing the tasks and checking the box, but really focusing on the leadership and the people. I owe him a lot for getting me on that path. He helped encourage me to get into the leadership studies and the books and a lot of different conferences, which was absolutely fantastic. So, it was a great experience for me. Jake started in the company and he came with so much great experience that I was able to learn so much from him in that perspective. He came in, he hadn't been in cell therapy, if I recall correctly, but he knew what he was doing, right? He was the head of quality. He knew what needed to be done, and he helped guide us. And it was a really great opportunity to learn that from him and to grow and develop with him, over the course of my career there. And, I was very fortunate to have the opportunity to work very closely with both of them at BMS.
Yeah, they're great. They're both great guys and have a great story behind them. And I can see why, people would want to work for them, with them. So fast forward then, you got through the approvals. What was that like, first and foremost? How did that feel to get over the finish line?
Yeah, so I guess the one that I was most heavily involved in was the Abecma approval at BMS. That was so exciting for me. I joked that Abecma was my baby. I brought it from early, IND, transferred it into the company, then brought it into commercialization. It was absolutely incredible. A great experience. I don't know how many people can say that they brought a cell therapy product from start to finish, all the way through to commercialization. Yeah, so it's a great experience. Super exciting. It was awkward timing. It was in the middle of COVID, so we didn't really have that much of an opportunity to celebrate or to gather. So it did kind of put a damper on that piece of it, but it was truly incredible. And then, fast forward and, 2023, I joined Iovance. And we had already filed the BLA for our TIL for Amtagvi. And then we went through PLI, and I was heavily involved in PLI. And that was just a fantastic experience for me to be involved in that so early on. And, it was just so fantastic for the team that had been on the TIL since the beginning. I kind of walked in kind of at the tail end, it was a little awkward, like, hey guys, here I am. You've been working on this for a while, but, just the dedication and the drive of the group at Iovance to get this product across the finish line and to be the world's first commercially approved TIL, that was fantastic. It was, just a wonderful experience. It was super exciting. And, I get to walk around and say I have a couple of world firsts under my belt, and not many people can say that.
Absolutely. And what lessons did you take, I guess, from going from BMS to Iovance? Obviously, I know you came in towards the back end of it, but I'm sure there would have been lessons that you learned in terms of the sort of the commercialization process and approval and the launch that you took to the Iovance guys when you joined there?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me when I joined Iovance was setting up a successful organization and an organizational structure. I came in and the QC organization was set up in a certain way, and that worked for them at the time, but it wasn't necessarily going to be successful in commercial. So I sat there and I worked with the team, I worked with my leader, and I outlined, right, like, I've just been manufacturing cell therapy that had commercial approval for 2 years. Here's how I see this going. And here's the areas that, we need to condense. Here are the areas that we need to build. Here's the infrastructure that we need to get in place to help us be successful. And so I brought that knowledge, and I was very fortunate. I have a really wonderful, supportive boss at Iovance, and the leadership team and executives are really helpful, and they supported me building that infrastructure to set us up for success. So you have that piece, and then, like I was saying before, keeping your eyes open on the data and just tracking it and looking at it. That's something that I also, highlighted to the team. This is something that we need to do. And we were able to build all the right trackers and the tools and analyze the data as we needed to make sure that we were going to continue to be successful.
Yeah, nice. So, and then I guess for leaders who are, maybe whether it be a QC director, head of QC, or VP of QC, that are going through that commercialization of an ATMP or cell therapy, what would you say to them in terms of knowing what you know now from both a technical and leadership standpoint? What would you say to people that are going through that challenge and might be approaching that late phase and the finish line is in sight? Were there any key bits of wisdom that you would, if you had to summarize, you would say, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this kind of thing? Yeah.
I don't mean to keep going back to it, but having the infrastructure, right? Having that successful design in your organization, having the right staffing, knowing the people that you need to meet your demand, meet your projected capacities. You need to also really focus on the team. It's a very stressful time. So making sure that you keep the team engaged, keep them motivated. Like you said, you're trying to get across that finish line. You're dealing probably with requests from the agency, to explain situations. You're getting ready for inspection. You've gone through inspection. You're responding as needed. You can lose a lot of people's engagement in that time if you just keep running full steam ahead. So I think we always have to remember the people aspect of it. So, anybody can sit there and give you a checklist of what you need to build from a processes and an infrastructure perspective. If you had any commercial experience, that should be pretty straightforward to come in with. But that people piece, not everybody has that. And it's really, really important to make sure you take the time to acknowledge your team members, to recognize them for their work, to have one-on-ones with them, check in, see how they're feeling, keep your finger on the pulse, and just understand how the team is. Because like you were saying before, if they're burning out and they're struggling, they may not stay. And then, you're in a situation where you can't support your patients. But I think the people piece is the biggest thing that people tend to overlook when going through that process.
Do you, when you're interviewing people for these types of roles, do you delve into like what are they like under pressure? How are they going to cope with in tough spots? Do you delve into the mindset piece of it?
Absolutely. I always say, and I've said this my entire career that I've been hiring in cell therapy. Cell therapy is organized chaos, right? There's a plan, but the plan changes last minute, and you need to be resilient. You need to be agile. You need to be willing to adapt and find solutions. And I ask them in the interview process, I say, is that something you're looking for in your career right now? And if so, what are some techniques that you use to cope with? So I absolutely do that in all my interviews because I've learned in the interview process. I've brought people in, that had no cell therapy experience and they didn't quite understand the environment and it just didn't work out for them. Yeah. And that's okay, right? Not everybody is going to thrive or be successful in every different area. But from a recruiting and hiring perspective, I learned that, you do have to ask that up front and you do need to set that expectation that what they're coming into may not be what they're used to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's like you say, it's organized chaos and it's constantly evolving. So you need to be able to be okay with that that environment. So let's just talk about, I guess, the people perspective a bit more, and then and go into a bit more of the QC kind of career trajectory that you've been on. So you mentioned that the end goal to become a CEO, like that's if you have that path or set your sights on that path. But what would you say to people that are going down that leadership route in QC at the moment? Because a lot of people I speak to in QC say, how do I get into quality? And maybe that's because they don't see a path forward in QC, that maybe they see it stops at director level, and there aren't huge amounts of vice presidents of QC in comparison to QA or quality as a whole. So what would you say to people that are in that path of QC, and where does their career, how does one's career unfold if you want to stay in that path?
Yeah, I've been in QC for over 16 years and I've grown and developed quite a bit. So I am 100% of the mindset that there are plenty of opportunities, especially in cell therapy, which is obviously where I've had the most experience. There are so many different facets within QC that you can learn all of them and still have growth and development opportunities. There's not just testing, not just environmental monitoring. There's different systems and services. There's training. There is a whole bunch of things that maybe people just aren't aware of. They may just think as QC is like this one, test, environmental monitoring done. And it's like, no, it's actually much more broad. And there are so many facets, as I was saying, that I don't think you need to go into QA to continue to advance. If you want to go into QA, great. That's a wonderful opportunity. Learn that skill set. But there's nothing in QC that, is stopping you from growing. You just need to look for opportunities. We have all different pathways for career development. And, in my previous role and in my current role, I've been working on what we call career pathways or career ladders. And, there's always the technical piece. Right. I think previously, too, many people thought that they couldn't move up in QC without going to leadership. I don't see that as being true either. I think there's always a technical route. We always need very strong technical people. We need principal scientists. We need subject matter experts. And I always see the technical route in QC. And then there's the leadership route in QC. And then you build that in each different team within QC, and you have a huge network of opportunities that you can continue to grow. And for me, there were 2 points in my career where I thought, well, I've hit the top of the QC ladder that I'm on. What am I going to do? Where am I going to go? And fortunately, because cell therapy is so dynamic, within a year, new opportunities in QC at higher levels opened up for me. So, I would not say, don't jump ship too soon, right? If it works for you and that's what you want to do, absolutely pursue that. But don't leave because you think things are done, right? Have the conversation with your leadership, have the conversation with your peers, and see what other opportunities could be out there that maybe you're just not aware of.
If you're hiring for your successor, for example, or successors, what traits would you look for in them? I mean, you covered a couple of them in terms of the mindset and things like that, but what if you had to sort of write your ideal type of person who to succeed in your role, what would they look like?
Yeah, so to run QC, I think it's really important to have that foundation of working in QC, right? Just coming in and being a high-level leader, I don't think is enough. I think you need to understand the people at the bench, the people in the clean rooms, and have that experience to know what questions to ask so that you can not only challenge people to think of different solutions, but also so that you know what kind of questions to ask to make sure that we don't run into major issues down the road. So I think the technical background is really important. They don't need to be a subject matter expert, but having that experience, it also helps them relate to the team better, because for me, leadership is, extremely important. Being able to keep the team motivated, being able to, keep everybody moving forward in a positive manner, looking for solutions, that's important to me. Is, the leader is 90, what do I say? I say about 80% of leadership is managing people and their expectations.
Yeah.
So being able to deal with people that are coming to you with difficult situations, being able to give them the right coaching and guidance, and then also being able to have some difficult conversations yourself when you need to give feedback to people. Feedback is a gift. You can't grow and develop without receiving it. So having that skill set is, I think an extremely important piece to be successful in this type of role.
Yeah, I agree. And what are what challenges you typically face when you're trying to find good people in QC?
So it goes on to extremes. So sometimes you get people that are so technical that they don't have the leadership experience. And then you have the other side where people are so high level and so involved in leadership and high level non-technical pieces that they don't have that foundation to be able to relate to the work that is done. So those are the challenges at the high level roles. I think just in general, cell therapy, when I was first hiring, having cell therapy experience was a huge gap, right? It was, 7-8 years ago. It wasn't as big as it is today. And like I had said a few times, it's really hard to understand what the cell therapy environment is like without being in it. So that to me is really, really important. So, when I have roles that I hire and I'm working with my recruiters and they say, what are your must-haves? And I say, well, they must have this technical skill based on, the team that they're overseeing. And I would really, really prefer that they have cell therapy experience so that they can understand the environment that they're walking into and have already dealt with it and have those tools and that group of resources to help keep the team moving forward.
Yeah, it's an interesting one when you're hiring in cell therapy, because most people will want people with cell therapy experience, but the reason for that seems to be around the mindset, because they can cope with the changes and the pace of which things evolve. So rather than, obviously the technical side is important, but the ability to evolve and move and adapt quickly is almost the most important thing from a mindset perspective. But we're coming to, it's been a fascinating conversation, Andrew. We're coming towards the end of it. Before, I'm going to ask you some quick fire questions in a second, but just to cap off the discussion, I suppose, where do you see cell therapy going, for the next sort of 5-10 years? It's evolved a lot in a relatively short space of time, but how do you see the future?
Yeah, so I would love to see cell therapy, TIL, CAR-T as frontline therapies, right? Being the first option for patients, and really being able to help them right out of the gate as soon as they get their diagnosis. I also think there's, that opportunity for allogeneic. Everything that we're doing right now is autologous, and that's fantastic. And it's a great opportunity for these patients that have no other treatment that can help them. But we talked about scaling up versus scaling out, and every lot being a patient. going allogeneic and having the same type of results and response and being able to do these large campaigns, I think is, would be huge for the patient population in the industry.
Awesome. Andrew, there's so many more things I'd love to talk about, but we're running out of time, annoyingly. Some quick fire questions to throw at you, just to finish things off. What are the 3 most important values that you live and die by?
Yeah, so I think for me, the first one, being in quality and compliance, is integrity. It kind of goes hand in hand. It's a pretty natural connection. After that, for me personally, it's excellence, not only doing things, but doing them well, doing it the best that you can, and then collaboration. You can't get anywhere on your own. People may think that if you keep your head down and you do work, you'll be fine. But no matter what, you always need other people to help you and help your team members. So I think when you pull all of that together, you have to be collaborative. You have to have good relationships with others. So those would be my 3 most important values.
Nice. If you were to go back to the beginning of your career, what would you tell your younger self about your career and leadership?
Yeah, definitely didn't end up where I thought I was going in a good way, but I think I would give myself the advice to start reading leadership books sooner. Focus on that growth and development, have that self-awareness and do that sooner. That's probably what I tell myself. Any
books you'd recommend? Leadership books?
So an oldie but a goodie, and I don't know if people classify it as leadership, but Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. That's always a good one. I always tell everyone 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Patrick Lencioni. It's a really easy story to read, but it gives you a great background. So those are usually the 2 books that I end up recommending to people. And then there's a plethora of others, but those are the first 2 that if you get those concepts right, you're in a pretty good spot.
Yeah, nice. Who's been who have been the biggest inspirations to you in your life? And that can be personally or professionally.
Yeah, so from a personal aspect, my grandmother was huge in my life. She was an incredible woman, right? She was born in 1914 and she lived to be 106, which is absolutely fantastic. And she had an incredible life. She was the only civilian who worked on a military base when my grandfather was in the Marines, and she was extremely well respected. She had that place like eating out of her hand. They would always listen to her. And then she ended up going and working in a law firm. And she just had this incredible work ethic and this drive. Like, she had so many difficult times, right? Think about from 1914 to 2020. There were a lot of big world events that she lived through.
Yeah.
But she always kept going. She never complained. She worked till she was in her 80s. And I think she only retired because they told her, like, you should probably retire. You're in your 80s. And she was still driving to work, still having a great time. And she actually went back to work at like 95. They invited her back. She stayed home and she took care of my grandfather. Unfortunately, he passed away, and her office called her and was like, do you want to come back and work for us part-time? And she was like, sure. So she went back to work. So, an incredible inspiration for sure. And
see where you get your resilience from then.
There you go. It's genetic. So,
exactly.
So incredible woman, and I'm very lucky to have had her in my life.
Amazing. Final question. What advice would you give to future QA or QC leaders?
Yeah, so I think in quality, our first response tends to be no, right? Because we want to maintain compliance, and that's very important. That's our job. We're the gatekeepers. But I think it's important for people to propose solutions, right? Don't sit there and tell me all the ways and reasons you can't do something. Understand what the problem statement is and propose solutions on how we can do it. And if everybody takes that approach, while of course maintaining compliance, we always need to do that. Everybody will be looking at things in a solution-oriented way, and I think things will be just better off overall.
Amazing. Andrea, thank you so much for giving us your time. It's a long one, but I think there's so much wisdom and you've been on an incredible journey and you've got so many more exciting things I'm sure that you'll achieve. So thank you so much for all of that coming on the show. And I think a lot of people will take a lot of inspiration and a lot of practical advice that they can implement into their own careers and lives. So thank you so much. We'll definitely have to have you back on again just to see how things are going in the next couple of years with Iovance. But all the best with everything. And thanks again for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a great experience. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure. Thanks, Andrea.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for listening to today's show. I hope that you got value from it, whether you're starting your career in quality or if you're at the top of your field. Today's episode was brought to you by RX Group. I'm the founder of RX Group. We are a pharma and biotech recruitment organization focusing purely on quality assurance. We recruit consultants and senior level permanent quality professionals into the pharma and biotech industry. If we can support you, whether that be in a hiring capacity or if you yourself are looking for work, please get in touch with me on LinkedIn, visit our LinkedIn page where you can subscribe to the podcast, and visit our website, www.rx-group.io, to find out more about us. See you soon.